What does it feel like to be on top of the charts? I'm Joel McConvey. Today on the Biometric Update Podcast, I talked to Yoti CEO Robin Toombs. In July, as Ofcom prepared to start enforcing the UK's Online Safety Act, Yoti's downloads exploded. Robin explains why people are beginning to trust digital ID for age assurance and other use cases, and how Yoti found itself at number one for a day. Welcome to Yoti's Robin Toombs, joining us today at the end of a fairly successful month for the company. Robin, welcome, and thank you again for joining. Can you give me an overview of how Yoti's business has looked since Ofcom began enforcement of the Online Safety Act? I know there's been some significant success.
Yes, Joel. We've seen a lot of people in the UK market and actually in the French market do a lot of age checks over the last 6-8 weeks. For France a bit longer than that because the laws changed there a bit earlier in the year. And a lot of people have chosen to do facial age estimation checks, which we thought they would, because that's what people have tended to do when we've offered them the choice over the last 5-6 years. But we, for the first time, really in the UK, saw a lot of people getting the digital identity to prove age because effectively I think they worked out that if they did it once in the app, either with age estimation or with an ID doc in the Yoti app, they could effectively then share over 18 with lots of sites rather than having to do another age check at that site. So that was, we've spent a long time patiently waiting to hope that people might begin to do that. But obviously it's hard because, you've got to have businesses accepting that over 18 attributes. Otherwise, it's not useful to the individual, and you've got to have individuals who decide it's in their interests if they're going to have to regularly prove age to work out that a reusable ID is worth getting in the first place.
I think it's fair to say it's a work in progress still, and there's still a lot to do on the acceptance side in particular. But I would say, don't be modest. Can you tell us a bit about the position on the App Store that Yoti has found itself in terms of downloads? There's not a lot of businesses like yours that find themselves on that list.
No, we were. Let's call it pleasantly surprised or completely flabbergasted that we thought we would obviously get quite a few people get the Yoti app, particularly for a few days, but to be number one for a few days in France, and I think we were number one for one day in the UK and number two for a couple of days, and we've been doing decent volumes ever since. It's been quite a surprise, but it kind of does show that if the government's going to get serious about asking people to prove age or prove ID, I think increasingly people will decide that it's worth getting a reusable to do that, whether they do that with Apple, Google, Yoti, or another provider. It makes sense if the regulations force for businesses to accept it, that you'd rather have one passport to get into 200 countries than fill in 200 visa forms if you go to 200 countries. And it's the same with reusable ID. If you think the businesses will accept it, it's going to make a lot of sense to have one or two of them rather than keep on proving ID with your physical document each time online, or to prove age.
Mm-hmm. Would you say, obviously you've been prepared for this for a long time, like you said. Would you say that the government, it's been a success on the government side, that the UK, that the EU have been, and France in particular, have been successful in rolling these programs out?
It's a really tough question. I think you could be generous and you could say, the government wanted to do something. They were under pressure to do something because so many parents are upset about, young kids in particular, not necessarily 16, 17-year-olds, but, 8, 9, 10-year-olds being able to have basically stumble across or choose to look at hardcore porn, even if they weren't really looking for hardcore porn. All of that being super accessible for so many years is, the government needed to do something, and I think that's going to increasingly be the case in other countries. So they've done something. There's lots of people who rightly say it's not perfect. Very few laws are perfect, particularly when they first come in a new area. People use fake ID to go in and buy alcohol in shops, and lots of those fake IDs aren't spotted. And some people think that's imperfect, but most people wouldn't remove that law because otherwise you'd have tons of kids going in there and buying alcohol. So I think it's similar. It's not perfect. The government, you could argue, hasn't done the job as well as it could have done, or possibly the regulator could have done better. But reality is they've started doing something. Quite a lot of big companies have started complying. And there definitely are lots and lots of people who've chosen to do it. There may also be quite a lot of people who've chosen to use VPNs or get round the compliance with a clever kind of certain amount of effort. But reality is a lot of people have chosen to get on and use an age check and then get an account. And they might not like having an account, but if they use the right Superman 4222 username and a password, it's that's how they basically will now get into their adult content. And it hasn't really caused them too much of a risk privacy wise, because they haven't had to do tons and tons of ID docs. So 85% of people with Yoti have used facial age estimation, and most of the rest have used the ID, reusable ID. So a lot of the kind of, this is going to cause everyone in the country to have to use ID, and it's going to be a surveillance state, and the government shouldn't be dreaming of doing this. I think most people have dismissed that as kind of overhype. Otherwise they would have not got on and used the age checks available and cracked on with it.
Well, that's just it. And I think it's an interesting point you make about the fact that it doesn't have to work 100% of the time. It's ideal, but people seem to be expecting perfection from this technology. When we think a good baseball player is hitting 350, that's a great percentage. So and have you found it difficult to address that point with people? Like, this is better than nothing. We're not perfect, but it's close.
Yeah, look, there's some strong opponents of this. There's some strong privacy opponents. There are some strong cybersecurity opponents, and there are some strong, kind of freedom of speech, opponents. Some of those opponents will basically go out of their way to find, the best or, whatever evidence to try and claim that it's so bad and so ineffective and, it really doesn't deserve to be done at all, and kind of dismiss the fact that, 80% of adults, not just parents, but adults think it needs to be done, even if it's not anywhere near perfect. And, my view's slightly biased. I think it's like you, it's way more effective than, useless. It's pretty good, actually. You've got to choose, if you've got Yoti on the site, you're going to have to basically go off and get a VPN, or you're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to beat Yoti, facial age estimation, or the digital ID. And, some people, super committed to doing that. And if they're adults, it's kind of okay. I think a lot of kids, have given up trying to beat Yoti. We don't get that many kids trying to do that anymore, as we used to 4, 5, 6 years ago. But a lot of them have learned that it's quite tough to beat Yoti. So, personally, I think lots of adults, think this needs to be done. And even if it's not brilliant, it's kind of 80-90% pretty good. And if adults get around it, it's not a killer. But if it stops a lot of kids from getting around it, that's what we want. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of opponents forget that and then try and use bits of info to kind of say, I saw in Australia yesterday, but I think it was The Guardian saying, it's not perfect, and some 15-year-olds are being estimated at 16, as if that was a kind of crazily, kind of newsworthy piece of information. If you think about the offline world, people have been allowing shop owners with a challenge 25 in many countries to basically go, look, we know you're not very good at estimating age. We're going to have a really wide buffer. 18 to buy alcohol. If they look to you under 25, you've got to ask for ID. Yeah, that buffer is, 7-8 years, because they don't think people are that good at estimating age. The beautiful thing about facial age estimation now is it's tested by NIST, it's tested by the Australians, and you can see that it's clearly doesn't need a buffer of 7-8 years. You can set that at 21. And you would get a very effective, only 1 or 2% of 16, 17-year-olds would get through. So, and I think people understand that. And some of the opponents just, they don't really want to, recognise that that's quite an effective law.
This is a question I posed in a piece recently, and I think it's related. I want to talk about the Australian results because Yoti has fared fairly well in those too. But there seems to be a real hesitation to trust a company like Yoti, any age assurance provider. And often the topic is about social media. It's like, well, we don't want to stop kids from getting on social media, and we don't want to give our data to Yoti. And I don't understand quite why people are so willing to defend a company that has gobbled data as their business model, and yet so hesitant to put their face in front of a camera for a company like Yoti, which is obviously operating above board. Why do you think it's so hard for people to trust this technology?
Yeah, I think it's partly that it's still new. So in the UK, we don't see very many people complaining about it as much. Now, obviously, in the last 5-6 weeks, there have definitely been a very noisy minority of people who've complained vociferously. But we know that at least 10 million people have already done, Yoti facial age estimation. OnlyFans has been one of our, clients who've been using our technology for years. So certainly PlayStation, Meta's been using it for years, TikTok's been using it for years. Lots and lots of Brits have already done it and worked out that, hey, it actually estimates me. We only tell them if you're over 18. We don't tell them we think you're 43. But most of them are going, hey, it gets me right. I am over 18. Or it gets me right, I am under 18. So a lot of them have kind of learned that from their own experience. So when they probably read press articles which say, it's terrible, and it's completely, ineffective, and it's easy to beat, and it's very inaccurate, I just don't think they believe it genuinely. So that's a positive thing. I kind of think it's a bit weird that people are writing articles saying, look, it's a shock and a horror that people are going to have to use their face to prove their age, and they're giving tons of data to Yoti, which could go off and sell it and whatever. The reality is almost everyone on social media, unless you want to stay anonymous, puts their face on their account so that all their friends can see them and see all of their pictures and all of that stuff, even if they keep it private to just their family and friends or whatever. They tend to put their account face in, and they've got their faces on lots of photos. So, people get very het up about the idea that we might once encrypt that face, bring it back to the server, de-encrypt it, hold it in memory, check liveness, check age, destroy the face, or don't store it to disk, and give the result to Meta. And possibly lots of people don't understand that. Maybe they don't trust us, but the reality is you just have to have smart regulation, which does basically require that that's what AV providers do, or if you allow a relying party, that they must do the same with that age check, even if they've got an account picture which somebody's happy to have on their account. And over time, increasingly regulators who are demanding that, people will begin to accept it, because we would be out of business if we basically said that we were destroying all of those 900 million checks we've done. And we were telling the regulators that we were destroying them all. And then they found out that we weren't. Well, our credibility would be toast in the market. So I think over time people will think, yeah, they probably do. And after a few years, it'll be, I don't think it's just probably they do. They do, because otherwise they'd have got caught by now, and they'd be out of certification. So I think it's a funny one that people are still trying to suggest that most of the AV providers are, they can't be trusted, bound to be doing bad things with the data. And, there's a sensible business model in doing a check and then destroying the data. Like, we don't know your age, Joel. If you did a check, there is no value in us keeping your face for some kind of training data for age, because we don't know what ground truth age, you're not providing that to us. Maybe we could use it for liveness, but then we would be basically, deceiving you that we're deceiving, but we're just deleting the evidence. We would be not deleting the evidence and keeping it, and then we'd get found out at some point. Anyway, our principles don't allow us to do that. It's not in your interest for us to deceive you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sometimes people maybe just aren't familiar with the business model, and they assume that you want to monetize the data. And it's like, well, no, the checks are where the revenue comes. I want to talk a bit more about communication and just how you position Yoti as a brand, because it's now, again, punching with Facebook and Google, or Apple and Google in the age assurance forum. How has Yoti approached that side of things to sort of present itself to clients and to the public?
Well, we've always felt that we need to emphasize trust. And our principles, which we wrote out in year one of the business, these 7 principles that we have, are genuinely things that help us make, I think, usually good decisions on what we do. We're not perfect like anyone, but we find those principles help us a lot. Number one principle, that act in the interests of our users. Some people don't like us using the word users, but act in the interests of individuals. That is a really powerful principle. Yeah, if people, I have had people say to me, look, you should keep the data. You could do really interesting things with that data or whatever. And it's, well, if I could get consent in the Yoti app for people to let me keep the data and be clear with them that I'm going to do some security and safety training, which may be useful to them, like one-to-one face matching to ensure it's only them getting into their Yoti to protect their account, then that's cool. And, we would do that. But if they're not going to give me consent, or they choose at some point to remove their consent, I am going to remove it, because if I am trusted, I have a chance of an individual, trusting me for, years and years. And as long as I don't let them down and I still provide good services to them, I've got hopefully a reasonable chance of sustaining a successful business. As soon as I am using trust and then I deceive them or let them down, do things which are not in their interests and they weren't aware I was doing, then you lose trust. Everybody knows you lose trust very quickly in life, and it takes years and years to build up trust. And it's not easy to rebuild if you lose it. So that's always been important to us. Lots of our businesses kind of like the fact that we think you, Joel, want to be private. You want to do an age check. You don't want us to know anything else about what you're doing. If you use Yoti, we designed it so you could share your verified name with a business. We would not know it's you. It's designed so we have no way of knowing it's you. And the businesses have said to us, we like that. We like the fact that you don't know that Joel is doing something with us. We want to know it's a verified person, and we want to know it's him because we're going to do KYC, or we want to reduce fraud. But we love the fact that you're not surveying and checking where Joel is doing this business with Yoti. And that was really important to us when we first set Yoti up. We thought we didn't think it would take 2 years, but we thought it would take a while to work out how do we build a model where we can hopefully be a successful trust intermediary between businesses and individuals, where we do not need to know who is doing what with who. And that took a while, but now we've got that, we've got the security into that model. Lots and lots of businesses actually like it. They may not love, the fact that, they're being forced sometimes to do ID checks or whatever, but they like the fact that there's people like Yoti in the market who can make it easy for them to get an individual to do it, and that Yoti doesn't know who it was.
I know you're have lots on the go, so I won't keep you too much longer. But speaking of trust, the Australian age assurance technology trial decided to drop their results this past Sunday, ruining everyone's weekend, except perhaps not yours, because Yoti fared quite well in the assessments. Can you comment on the results, the final report?
Well, we were obviously, we were delighted that we were number one in the facial age estimation results. We're number one in the NIST teenage category, and it would have been embarrassing, I think, if we'd not been number one in the Australian ones. But we were delighted that the Australian one is using mobile phones, and actually the Australian one said, hey, they didn't say this, but we've always said that, our massive kind of internal testing where we publish all of that facial age estimation by year of age, by skin tone, by gender. And people have said to us for a long time, I kind of admire that you do it and it's really useful and insightful, but I'm not sure I completely believe it because you've got a massive interest in maybe claiming you've got really good stuff. And I kind of recognise that, but when we've now finally got, NIST was really good, but NIST doesn't use mobile phone images, and our businesses have always said to us, we want you to train on what's actually going to be used by people, and luckily that's the Yoti app. It's a mobile phone. That's how most people do these things. And for the Australians to use basically mobile phones and do those tests and basically show scores for us for those individual ages 12, 13, 14, or up to 23, which basically reflected pretty accurately within 5-6% of what our scores are that we publish. And we've been publishing those kind of scores, which have been improving for the last 6 years. But now we have some validation from, yes, NIST thinks we're good, but actually our model's not optimized for passport type photos taken from, a metre away. It's optimized for mobile phones from a foot away, and the Australians have corroborated that. So we're really glad about that. It's a bit worrying that some of the scores on that table were quite low, and of course that's allowed the press to say, if we allow anyone to do this type of thing, then lots of people are going to get incorrectly estimated, and that means the whole thing's no good. So there's definitely a need for the Australians to think, we're going to have some kind of minimum standards to ensure there's trust for, if you're going to ask 90% of adults or whatever to do something, they're not wasting their time if part of the purpose of them doing it is to ensure that a reasonably high percentage of the underage don't get through because you're using poor quality age checks.
Leading to my last question, which is, we're very much at an inflection point right now with this stuff, with regulations. People are discovering it. People are being presented with it on various platforms. What role is Yoti going to play in helping to establish this ecosystem? Where do you see the company fitting in terms of leadership and the future?
It's a tough question to ask because, we'd love to play a big role, but you've got people like Apple and Google who are going to be quite influential in this space. They may well get certified in some countries to do, effectively the same type of thing that we're doing with a reusable ID. And, that's quite a scary place to be. Having said it, we want to encourage individuals to be able to pick a, really smart, secure way, hopefully trusted, certified way of being able to prove their ID, prove their age, hold credentials, and do things much more easily and with strong security, with control, with privacy. And if we can be part of that solutioning, which I think will end up needing to be interoperable. Interoperability is only possible when you've got proper certification, because then people, liability-wise, can trust that there is a minimum level, of certification. We hope that we play at least some part in ensuring that, lots and lots of people over the years to come go, whether I chose Yoti or whether I now use Apple or whatever, I'm in control of my ID. When somebody uses my name, date of birth, address in a web form, I used to never find out unless they defrauded me, and then I was told, hey, you owe us money for a loan. Whereas now, or in the future, you'll own your ID, you'll own your passport, your unique passport number, your unique driving license number. And I think people will, businesses will go, okay, we need to do that hash check to kind of check that name, date of birth, postcode or zip code or, that unique passport. Let's go and check whether it's held in Apple or held in Yoti, and if the person's given consent for that check to be done and then confirms that they are applying for the loan, super. If they also go, no, I'm not applying for a loan, that is some fraudster who's got my data, the business wins because they've done a sensible check and get alerted and doesn't give the loan out. And I win because even if I can't control the knowledge of that data that's gone to the fraudster, I can stop them basically taking out that financial loan. And I think in 5-10 years' time, it will be much, much harder for fraudsters to basically, scam more and more people and deceive more and more businesses, because people will have a biometric link to ID wallet, which makes it much easier to confirm when you are interacting and also flag when somebody else is pretending to be you. That's an awesome place to be in years to come. We want to be part of that. And if we were to fail commercially, but we ended up with that happening in 5-10 years' time, I'd be gutted for Yoti and all of the team working really hard at Yoti, but I'd also be glad that tens and tens of millions of people would finally have some solutions which would stop fraudsters causing them so much misery.
Well, it doesn't appear things are going that way at the moment. You seem to be on a pretty good trajectory. And on that note, I'll thank you again for joining us and congratulate you on the success and wish you luck in the ongoing story of age assurance.
Now, there's lots more to do, not just by us, by lots of really hard-working ID and biometric companies. But thanks very much for having me today.
Thanks once again to Yoti's Robin Toombs for taking time out of his busy schedule to talk with the Biometric Update podcast. Yoti is online at yoti.com. And for all the latest on biometrics, digital identity, and age assurance, be sure to visit www.biometricupdate.com.